Hello, my name is Vince Spaney. I am the producer, the director, and the host of the show, Vinsanity Unplugged. The show is featured on CTV of Lane County, Oregon, soon to be spreading to the other affiliates throughout the state of Oregon. You can find me on the YouTube channel, Vinsanity Unplugged, and soon I'll be on Spotify and Apple Tunes and other streaming video outlets. Now today, I'm going to be talking about a book that I wrote titled An Evolutionary Argument in Favor of Keto-Adaptation. So, it's a big mouthful, isn't it? Why did I write the book? Well, the fact of the matter is keto's all the rage now, and you have a lot of people writing about keto, a lot of people talking about keto as if it's something new. But a ketogenic diet was first developed in the early 1900s. Like around, I think, 1910, 1912 at the John Hopkins, I believe it was the John Hopkins University Hospital. There was a ward of children that had life-threatening seizures. They suffer from chronic seizures. And these seizures, like I said, were life-threatening, and they were chronic, and medications did not seem to help. So the physicians and the researchers were desperate. Why was this happening? How could we prevent it? There are no drugs that seem to be helping these poor individuals. So what do? Well, certain studies found out that these young adults or children were suffering from seizures because they had some faulty mechanism in the brain that did not deal with the uptake of glucose well. So the too much, to see, people don't understand, too much glucose in your blood or in the brain is toxic, and it was causing a misfiring of the brain. So they reasoned that we got to get these kids' sugar levels down, the brain sugars down, right? So they experimented with a low carb diet, lower carb diet, eventually zero carbs. And of course, these kids started getting better on zero carbs because their sugar levels, blood sugar levels, could not get too elevated. But they determined also that these kids needed to have other nutrients, obviously. They needed protein. But they found that if they gave these individuals, based on their weight and activity level, too much protein, beyond a certain level of protein, their body would go into what's called neoglucogenesis or gluconeogenesis, something like that, convert the excess protein into blood sugar, and sometimes that would cause a spike that would cause a blood sugar that would cause seizures. So they found out, okay, zero or next to no carbs, no sugar, moderate protein intake, but these kids were growing kids. They required calories. Because let's face it, 100 grams of protein is only 400 calories. 5 grams of fat, let's say 10 grams of fat, that's 40 calories. 440 calories. People can't live and thrive on 440 calories. So where do they get the other calories? Well, it came from fat sources. And at the time, they didn't have all the new fancy vegetable oils that they have now. They didn't have the I don't believe they had margarine then. They just basically had fat that you get from the farm. You know, lard. I think maybe olive oil, butter, cream. And that's how they made up the caloric difference. Now, before they went on this program, they were fearful that eating this much fat may cause the kids to get fat. But it did the opposite. They had a few patients that were overweight and so forth, and yet their body started burning off excess body fat. And a lot of kids on this diet never had a seizure again. Or the ones that did, the seizures lessened in frequency and severity. So it was a wondrous diet. It was called the Ketogenic diet. And what happens is when your body's burning fat instead of sugar, the burning of the fatty acids produces ketone bodies. As it turns out, recently science has learned that the brain prefers ketone bodies as fuel as opposed to glucose. And the body does really well with fatty acids. The muscles like burning fatty acids, and along with glucose. I mean, the body, the muscles could burn glucose, store glucose, and as far as in the form of glycogen, but it really likes fatty acids. Now, how is it that we haven't been on this diet for a while? And the fact of the matter is, most people believe that a high starch diet, high carbohydrate diet is more natural for us, instead of eating meats and fats and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, humanity has only been farming for about 15,000 years. Our genetics show that our ancestors went back maybe 250,000 years. Prior to farming, what did they do? They hunted and gathered. Some people would say, oh, well, we think hunter-gatherers weren't that successful as hunters, and they just basically harvested and gathered their carbohydrates. Now, that's true to a point, but if you look at the modern vegetables and tubers and so forth and wheat, it wasn't like they had rolling plains of wheat and grain. And they went in and just kind of got barrels and barrels of grain. I'm talking about pre-Egypt and China and so forth, in the Mesopotamian area and so forth. So you look at the modern vegetables even before the current gene splicing and CRISPR and so forth, have been bred over time to be bigger, arguably more nutritious, and so forth. If you look at all the vegetables in the supermarket today and you go back to its original ancestor, it looks like a weed. It looks like a little scrubby thing. But I'm sure it was nutritious, filled with bioflavonoids and all sorts of other antioxidants and phytochemicals that really bring health and well-being to the body. They didn't have fields and fields of potatoes and other tubers. But tubers and so forth are available, cattail tubers and so forth and so on. So, when you also consider the fact that they burned a lot of calories foraging food and digging up tubers and so forth, they earned their calories. Today, we don't really earn our calories like we did, like our ancestors did. So there's people who think, oh, they probably just stole eggs from birds' nests and trapped fish and got shellfish. And that's true, especially along the coastal areas. We have ancestors that they had a diet that was very high in omega-3s. Wild game is higher in omega-3s than compared to the cattle that are raised and corn-fed. Anyways, I give an evolutionary argument why keto is what helped humanity to survive. Because if you're glucose addicted, if you're addicted to carbohydrates and glucose dependent, you go a day or two without eating and you feel like you're starving, you're lightheaded, and you're so forth, right? Now, glucose is a good source of energy. So it is speculated that our hunter-gatherer relatives, every now and then, during certain seasons, would harvest fruit. Now you got to remember, the fruit back then was not hybrids like it is today. You get a big orange, this big, delicious orange, and you look at the original oranges, and they're smaller and tart and scrubby. And the modern oranges have packed with far more sucrose and fructose per area as compared to the small orange, the original orange. So the original fruit weren't as laden with sugar, weren't as dense, and didn't possess such a high volume of sugar as the modern fruit. And again, it was seasonal. They didn't have fridges to keep it long. They didn't do long-term shipping like in one part of the United States now. Certain fruits will come in season and then they're not. But then in the southern hemisphere, while we're out of season here, they're growing those pears and fruits, and it's shipped up. So literally, in the United States alone, in affluent nations, you go to the supermarket and get fruit all year round. But in early Paleolithic and Neolithic times, fruit was very seasonal, and you're competing with the animals to eat it as well. So you go into a grove or a little stand of trees, and you just collect and you start eating fruit. It's kind of, instead of vice versa, I speculate, and other experts as well, that fruit was more of an emergency source of food, not the primary. Glucose was an emergency source, or I should say sugar and starch is an emergency source of food, an additional thing. So we have two fuel sources that we can burn. Some people say three when they think of ketones, but pretty much the only way to get ketones is you buy supplementary ketones. So anyways, the people mainly had pemmican, I think it's pemmican or pemmican. It's high fat meat, dried beef, dried meat, saturate lots of fat, all dried, and that dried meat can be held in logs. So you could carry more calories over long distances in this pemmican or penicillin. I can't pronounce it, I gotta find out how it's pronounced, but as compared to this equal amount of calories in yams. So the amount of yams you would have to carry to provide you the same calories would just be too much. You could carry maybe a couple days worth, whereas you carry your dried beef sticks, you can walk forever. You go longer. That's many more days or months of food that you could bring with you instead of a couple days or a week's worth. And as humans had to migrate all around the earth, they had to go through rough patches where there weren't food. And if you're keto adapted, your body's burning body fat, and you can go without food for longer periods of time than if you're not keto adapted. Your person who's keto adapted can fast for a long period of time and have all this energy. Whereas somebody who's not keto adapted, yeah, they'll survive, they'll burn their fat, but they're going to be hurting. So I say that early man, even when he wasn't a hunter, ate bugs. Bugs are a very key part. They would make for a very ketogenic diet. They probably have the highest source of protein and wonderful fatty acids and minerals and so forth per weight compared to any other protein source that we get. So if you're just eating grubs and termites and all sorts of other bugs, it's a very ketogenic diet. And of course, they're eating scrubby vegetables and weeds and herbs and tubers. So that's why I wrote the book, and I also wrote the book because I was suffering, prior to me suffering from obesity and COPD and metabolic syndrome. I was a strength athlete for many years, and I learned that I could get more ripped and keep my weight down because I wanted to compete in the lower weight classes by going on a very low carbohydrate diet. I learned that by eating lots of eggs, and I got this advice from Bill Pearl. He wrote much about this, and the famous legendary genius Vince Gironda, who's been advocating since the 40s that the biggest health problems from causing obesity and heart disease was the elevated triglycerides caused by overconsumption of carbohydrates. So both these guys were really into eating eggs, specifically fertile, grass-fed, free-range eggs, chickens, and evidently they're both right. The theory that eating a diet high in cholesterol from eggs would cause high cholesterol was false. I noticed that when I went on a diet high in cholesterol from eggs, my HDLs went up, but my LDLs dropped so low that my total cholesterol would drop. Not only did I not get fat from eating all that fat and olive oil, I got leaner. It was something I noticed, and I speculated that was because of my ethnicity. I'm 1/4 Native American. My mother and her parents are half Native American. So I had the theory that certain ethnic groups tolerated carbs better than others, and other ethnic groups did not tolerate carbs that well and preferred a fuel source of protein and fat. That was the case for me. And so I also remember when I doing a lot of research at the time, as a young man in my 20s, I read about the ketogenic diet put on the kids for epileptic disorders or seizure disorders. So I did a lot of reading over the years, did a lot of experimentation, and the year before I came close to tying a world's record in the squat, and I was in the best strength levels of my life. It was prior to my 40th birthday. I was I was eating a lot of eggs, eating a lot of fat. My fat diet included, from the eggs, was butter, olive oil, walnut oil, avocado oil. I was eating avocados, and a couple other oils that are high in omega-3s and so forth. Mixed it all together, lavished it all on, poured drenching. My salad was drenching with these fats because I ate a lot of greens still, had a lot of fats, and in 6 months, I went from 220 pounds, being pretty smooth, very muscular, but had a good deal of body fat on me too. You can still see my abs. And in 6 months, without doing cardio and without eating any carbs, I got down to 172 pounds. And then I glycogened up for a week or two. That's when I indulged in pasta a little bit every day. And I puffed up from the glycogen to 180 pounds. And that's when I performed my best strength levels. Also, my sex drive went up through the roof, like it was during my teens. So it's something to think about. Anyways, I eventually developed metabolic syndrome because I got a bad car accident. I was under stress. I had problems sleeping. I had sleep disorder, and that sleep disorder is one of the leading Sleep disorder is one of the leading non-dietary causes of obesity, fatty liver, diabetes, and so forth. And of course, if you get great sleep, a bad diet can cause all those problems as well. But getting poor sleep, well, all of a sudden you're accumulating body fat. Now, I was in an accident, I was in a lot of pain, and I also had to perform mentally. So for whatever reason, I'm the kind of person, you give me pain pills for pain, I could even break it down to a third, and yeah, it takes away the pain. But then I can't think. You give me a sleeping pill, I need to break it down to a third because a full one is just too much. So again, the next day I'm useless in class. And muscle relaxants, same thing for some reason. So there was a time I was in so much pain, had problems sleeping, and my muscles were just spasming, that the doctors actually pressured me to take these drugs. And it's odd, because there's a lot of people out there that are drug seekers, and doctors are suspicious of drug seekers. And oftentimes, I've seen doctors refuse, I've seen doctors that refuse to give pain medications to people I know who really needed them. But when they first asked me, or they asked me, like, are you looking to get anything for the pain? I'm like, no, I can't handle that type of medication. I'm using ibuprofen. I'll just have to stick with that. That's fine. And after a while, they realize this guy's not a drug seeker. So then they say, look, you're in pain. You can't function because you're in pain, because your lack of sleep. Your entire health is spiraling out of control. So out of desperation, I was taking one pill each, one muscle relaxant, one sleeping pill, at night, and the pain meds. And it got rid of my pain. It knocked me out. My muscles were darn relaxed, but I could not function. I couldn't think in class. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't study. So I started breaking these pills down, different experiments, down to a third, a little tiny snippet of it. Still, the same problem. I tried taking them separate. And my body's just oversensitive. I need very little for the drugs to do their job. And so here's what's ironic. As a young man, and when I was athletic, I'd go out to nightclubs and on occasion have probably more beers than I should have. Never got fat from the beer because I burned my calories. I burn. I trained hard. And even though I like alcohol, I like the taste of beer, And I admit it, I enjoy that 1 or 2 beer buzz. The problem with alcohol is you got to constantly drink throughout to maintain that buzz. And oftentimes, it's easy to get to a level of drunkenness, intoxication, that I do not enjoy. For whatever reason, a lot of people enjoy being really intoxicated. I do not enjoy it. But, I've been there, Um, but it turns out that for me, alcohol, I use it to self-medicate for 2 reasons. I used it to self-medicate for my pain, because it did help to deal with my pain. It helped my muscles to relax. It helped knock me out to go to sleep, although alcohol, later, the sugar, I'd wake up. So my sleep still, it was improved to a point when I wasn't drinking or taking any drugs, but it's still, essentially I was doing myself overall, long haul, more harm than good by self-medicating with alcohol. At the time I was self-medicating with alcohol to deal with my anger, my rage, my angst for what my employer, the United States Postal Service, was doing to me and to some of my friends. That I had several co-workers who died unnecessarily due to certain people in the post office breaking laws. That's another story. But the 2 years of drinking after the car accident, the car accident caused a lot of pain. And I thought I'd just man up and walk it off. I didn't try to litigate. What I should have done is got a lawyer and put my insurance company's feet to the fire, because I had a big, expensive charity vehicle, a vehicle that I, customize to do charity events. And this is a big diesel fire, what do you call it, ambulance, big one. Expensive. These vehicles go for $60,000 to $120,000 back then, right? And they wanted to give me $3,000, but I was so much going on, couldn't deal with it. So the accident left me in pain. I was unable to work out for the first time in years. I was forced out of work, even before becoming forced out of work and persona non grata before the accident. And suddenly, not only do I have an issue with a record of somebody willing to sue my employer, no matter how much in the right I was. A lot of potential employers, don't want to hear that you're the person who will go that far. Most people, when they cry and say, I'm going to sue, don't. Of course, that's the first thing most people say, I'll sue you, right? I'm the kind of person who said, I don't want to litigate, I don't want to litigate, I don't want to litigate, and I don't like to go and do things that are unnecessary unless my back's pushed against the wall. And doing it once doesn't make wanting to do it again easier. If anything, you're more reticent to get involved in any other little litigious incidences, situations. So I didn't sue my insurance company. I should have, for not for millions or anything like that, but just to have my physical therapy, to pay for all my physical therapy that I eventually had to go to. I walked around for 6 months and trying to walk it off, trying to man up, and it made it worse. That was stupid of me. So I'm drinking to deal with the pain. I can't work out. I'm constantly on the computer, sitting down. Sitting is the new, I forget what they call it. Sitting's the new smoking or something. It's long-term sitting can make you fat and hurt your back. But I was looking for work. Spent 2 years like that. I went from 180 pounds with 170 pounds of lean tissue on my body, and in 2 years slowly crept up. It was slow, but crept up to 240 pounds of body weight, and I had 130 pounds of lean tissue. So I lost about 40 pounds of lean tissue, and I put on all this weight. So essentially I was over 50% body fat. Over 50%. It did not make sleeping easier. And then I struggled at that for a while. I tried walking 5 miles a day, and I started working out again, and slowly getting back in shape, and that helped. My doctor said, your vitamin D levels, I can't find them. Your testosterone, we got to get you some hormone replacement. And I didn't want to do that because I was afraid of being trapped on hormone replacement for the rest of my life. Plus I had some things to experiment I wanted to see with weightlifting. And so I started working out. A year later, I'm still in chronic pain, chronic fatigue. I felt like weeping. And I said, okay, I'll go on hormone replacement. I'm done. I can't take it anymore. And unfortunately, my hormones, my testosterone went up to a level that he said, well, it's in the low end, but it's within range, and I can't give you hormone replacement when you meet this criteria. Okay. So I'm at 230 pounds. I'm walking 5 miles in the morning in the flat area down by the river. Then I'm doing the hills midday, 5 miles on the hills. And then later in the afternoon, 5 miles down by the river again. It's 15 miles a day. And I lost some fat. I felt better. And lifting weights helped me put on some muscle, but I was weighing in 230 pounds. And I looked like the younger brother of, Buddy Hackett. Both of us are short. Both of us are stocky. And at this time, both of us side by side looked like we had the same body. We're both overweight by a lot. So I'm still consistently keeping up with my training, getting my strength back, muscle memory's helping. And then I decided to do more studying on the high-fat diet because I was taking nutrition classes. I was going back to school, and my one professor, who was morbidly obese, she had master's degrees in nutrition, master's degree in dietary science. She worked for the military and had all these degrees in knowledge. And as I was losing fat by eating nothing but turkey and broccoli and olive oil, a little bit, I wasn't on keto, but I was cutting down, I lost a lot of fat. Of course, I was walking all day long, canvassing for signatures. So I was climbing upstairs. So I was chronic workout in the morning, chronic walking, and signatures. And basically, I had to go on a diet that they outlined. I had a customized for me, but I was required to eat a totally rounded diet, a conventional, more carbs than protein, more carbs than fat, and so forth. And I put 30 pounds of weight on again. And so I decided to do more research on high-fat diets. Will it make me fat? Yeah, it'll help me lose weight. It'll help me with my strength. My sex drive will go through the ceiling again. I will feel great, but will it do a lot of underlying damage to go on a high-fat diet? And after a lot of research, I decided to go on a high-fat diet. So I wrote this book also because I wanted to dedicate it to my mother, who died of Alzheimer's when she was 62. And I remember at the time getting the idea from the movie and the book Lorenzo's Oil, where he suffered from a rare genetic defect where he needed certain types of fatty acids for his brain not to get seizures for him, So basically they developed a compound based on olive oil and something else, and it brought him back to a point. And now they use this oil with these kids with the same genetic defect. They've given it administered from birth on up to a point. They do okay. They do well. They won't deteriorate and die from the disease that he was dying from, this kid, Lorenzo. So I reasoned by doing a lot of research that my mother should have been getting a lot of fat. She ate mainly by picking at food, while she cooked. She's always worried about her figure, because back in the day, men prized women who weren't overweight. It was a lot of pressure. And she's not somebody that was tended to be naturally overweight anyways. So, quite frankly, she was big on the Pepsis, lots of sugar. And people of Native American descent don't do well with alcohol and sugar. Most of them, right? And now they think that Alzheimer's and certain neurological diseases are considered type 3 diabetes, where it's a glucose malfunction, absorption, whatever in the brain that causes the Alzheimer's and so forth, or at least is part of the problem towards the person's brain manifesting symptoms of Alzheimer's and MS and Parkinson's and so forth. So I reasoned that she should be eating more fat, and I remember telling the doctors and telling my stepfather, we should get her on more fats, get her some olive oil, have her eat some avocados, whatever, some fatty fish, and back then they were afraid that fats would make her fat. Well, she might get heart disease, she might get obese. I'm like, she's dying, she has Alzheimer's, I think a few extra pounds around the midsection is worth seeing if it can make the Alzheimer's better. They wouldn't do it. Now it pisses me off, because nowadays their approach to people with early onset Alzheimer's is to help them to increase their fat intake of good dietary fats, not the vegetable fats and so forth, but the olive oil, the avocado, the whipping cream, stuff like that, half and half. And especially all the fats, especially the fats are high in the omega-3 type of fatty acid, because our modern diet is too out of balance for the most part, high in omega-6 and too low in omega-3s, and all these omega fats are help incite low levels of inflammation, and you need to have a certain amount of inflammation in your body to promote health, repair. If your joints don't get enough inflammation from the moving around, the cartilage isn't stimulated to grow. And too much inflammation causes the cartilage to overgrow and get disformed. No inflammation, the bone wears down to a point to where it's osteoarthritis. So there's a fine balance. Anyways, I did a lot of research. The book that I have, besides talking about my mother's situation, opening the introduction with that, and what could have been done, what should have been done, but wasn't. Not my stepfather's fault, by the way. He did so much for my mother, and I give a shout out to him. He proved to be far more of a stand-up guy than I've ever suspected. But the next chapter, I wrote this for my clients as a personal trainer, because I noticed a lot of my clients, a couple of whom were nutritionists and dietitians rather, and they're in their 40s, and some of these clients are getting fat, or not obese, but overweight, right? They want it to stay fit, so they're lifting weights and they want to stay trimmed. They want their tum-tums tight. They want their butts tight and high. And so my job was to help them do the very exercises to keep everything in balance. But it was once thought that you're making these people train hard and they're burning X amount of calories, and then you're finding out that they're allegedly they come in and say, this is how much I'm eating. You say, well, let me show me the protein, the fat, and everything else. And you were taught the conventional way, the conventional wisdom at the time was every calorie is a calorie. Every calorie is equal. If you burn more than you take in, then you should be losing weight. And if you're not, you're cheating. And that was the general, you hear trainers, I know she's cheating. I know she's cheating. And I got to thinking about this. And part of the reason why I thought it was possible these women weren't cheating is because I'm an obsessive person when I want to be. I mean, I don't follow obsessive protocols every day of my life. I'm not obsessive compulsive, but I am obsessive at times. I use that as a tool. Sometimes more to my sometimes I do too much obsessiveness, right? I'm obsessed about being obsessed. But the fact of the matter is I know I didn't cheat. There were times I kept everything on a QT, or bam, 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 everything in order. I mean, macronutrients, I knew I'd weigh stuff in, know exactly what I was weighing in, what the calories were, what the nutrients were, even the micronutrients, how much omega-3s and 6s. I got it all charted out on Excels. Where there's, you put in certain ratios and it recalculates and everything. Spent a lot of time on that. Why? Because I'm obsessive. I'm trying to be as scientific as possible. And even though a lot of people thought I didn't need to worry about this other stuff over here, this is what I need to focus on, I'm like, well, how do you know you don't need to focus on that other stuff? Maybe you don't. But if you start doing stuff here and patterns over here start emerging, at least you have something to work with. So it's best to start out of the gate with collecting as much data as possible and keeping it organized, right? So that's when I realized, wait a minute, if I'm not cheating and I'm burning more calories, like a lot more calories than I'm taking in, what's going on? Something's up. Obviously, calories in, calories out, there's some differences there. And if I'm eating really low calories, but I go beyond a certain carbohydrate limit, I'm getting fat. Even though I'm burning, say, 5,000 calories, 6,000 calories, and yet I'm eating 1,500 calories, 2,000 calories, and most of that's carbohydrates, hardly any fat. I'm getting fat, right? That's weird. Even if my protein's low, even if my fat levels, my fat intake is low, if I notice because of these charts that if I eat a certain amount of carbohydrates beyond a certain amount, I get fat, start putting fat on. I noticed I could get away with eating a lot of calories, sometimes even more calories than my Fitbit or other metric devices say I was burning. If I had a high-fat diet, low carbs, I could get away with eating. If I was burning 5,000 calories, I could take in 7,000 calories. And not only would I not get fat, fat started dripping off me. But the thing, the body's cyclic and things change because how we deal with calories, see, our bodies aren't just a thermos. Our body isn't just a furnace. You know, the law of thermodynamics does come in, but we don't just incinerate food as a fuel. It's not that simple. There's a lot of different hormonal processes. Some experts think there's like 20, 30, 40 different hormones involved for helping us to achieve becoming overweight. There's other evidence showing that if you're fat here, your cortisol levels are high. If you're fat on your back, maybe it's your thyroid levels. I'm not really an expert on any of that. Charles Poliquin, world famous trainer, talked about that. So anyways, in this book, I give an argument as to why civilization was able to spring forward from, you know, why humanity was able to survive and basically spread to the point where they could settle in settlements and have access to a permanent food source, more or less. They could grow their own food instead of look for their own food. So there's an advantage to having a place to where you could grow your own food. Just walk outside, grab something to eat, a tomato, broccoli, tubers, potatoes, and then, you know, herd your goats, your pigs, whatever, have the food right there. It's always on hand. And that allowed, of course, city-states to develop. You know, little settlements become a conglomeration of bigger settlements, and then with human beings being hierarchy animals. I'm sorry, I have a speech impediment today. Hierarchical animals, where some people decided, hey, I'm the person that is in power. I am a God king, the direct descendant of God, or a high priest or whatever. And so they became a caste system: serfs, priests, royalty, warrior class. Because when you have these big settlements, it makes sense to a degree. You have the settlements, that's more people, more things to steal from organized marauding bands of barbarians and vandals and so forth. So they had to develop militaries to protect this growing city-states. But the downside of city-states is that it gave convenience and ease to eat. It allowed people to overconsume. They didn't have to earn their calories like they used to. And of course, the cheapest, easiest food to grow were the carbohydrate-dense foods. Carbohydrate-dense foods store easier and longer than fatty foods, and obviously meats. Meats have to be smoked. So we find ourselves consuming more. Anyways, that's how I looked at it. That's the story I wrote in a certain section. Then I got into the nitty-gritty of all the keto, the finer points of keto. Because a lot of people are on what's called a keto diet, but they never go into nutritional ketosis. They lose body fat because they're on a low-carb diet. The foods are nutritious, so they get the greens. But somebody like myself who's really metabolically disrupted, I need to go on very, very low carbohydrates. And I have found that I could be eating moderate protein, high fat. And if I just get a little bit too much cooked spinach, it knocks me out. And of course, there's other factors that cause people to get fat or stay fat. Like me, I'm a little overweight now, more than just a little bit. And it's hormonal. So if you're elevated levels of cortisol, it's going to make it harder to lose fat regardless of the diet you're on, especially when you're my age. Lots of intricacies. But what I did with my keto book, I read a lot of keto books. I hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours listening to lectures of the foremost keto experts in the world. And I noticed there was a lot of redundancies because there was a lot of agreement. They agreed on what was good, they agreed on what was bad. for the most part. But there were some differences, some opinions, because it's still, it's not one size fits all. So I analyze those opinions and I put those in the book. Peter so-and-so says this, Dr. so-and-so says that, and I experimented with this, and I'm going to speculate by reading and testing both of them that this might be true because of this might be true because of that, or whatever. I give a critique. So I basically did a codification of like the 20 books that I've read and all the university abstracts, research abstracts I put in there, and all the lectures. So there's actually like, the book is like 300, 400 pages. 200 of those pages are where I made citations. I cited the work that was done. Boom, boom, boom. This was cited by this person, this research group, and so forth. And not only did I put the site in, there's often links to where you could go, take you right to that university's abstract of that paper, or take you right to a link of that video, so you can listen to these wonderful doctors talk. So basically, this book is a codification of all these other books. Now, some other books have been published since then, so I can't say anything about that, but a codification from all these books and lectures and so forth, where you have links to check it out. And of course, I give my viewpoints of how I reacted to a lot of these different experiments and modifications and so forth. Actually, this book I first gave to a couple, I gave in print, not hardbound, but I gave a manuscript to a couple of my clients. And again, a lot of my clients, some of my personal training friends thought they were cheating. And yet, a lot of my clients were obsessive high-level athletes in high school and college. And they still continue to train because they're prideful and they take pride in what they do, and their discipline. And it's a kind of discipline that was the reason why they became nurses and doctors and surgeons and veterinarians and so forth. These are high-level clients. These are people of consequence, people of discipline, people of high intelligence. And yet, according to the conventional wisdom of the time, they were supposed to be losing fat. So losing fat is kind of tricky, and it's not all about calories in, calories out, but I want to recommend you all to Nick the Trainer dude, he's like an intuitive genius when it comes to helping his clients lose body fat and keep muscle, get ripped. He trains a lot of women in their 40s and 50s who are now champion bodybuilders, drug-free too. He worked with me, and his methods do work to lose body fat, but I was so impaired metabolically, metabolic syndrome, that there's something called carb cycling. Basically, you start with a tolerable level of carbs, tolerable in the fact that it gives you energy and you don't feel tired, but you're not really losing body fat. And especially with me, I can't, the amounts of carbohydrates that allow some people to lose fat, I would stay fat or get fatter. But I would have energy. And then it's carb cycling, for a couple of days you go lower in carbs, and then a couple of days you go lower carbs still, and so forth. So 2/3 of the month, I felt like I had Alzheimer's, and I felt tired and near death. I just felt so fatigued. I just looked terrible, felt terrible. Tired, could barely think. It was just terrible. And then one day of that week, I would feel okay. And one day I'd feel like energy. So yeah, I was starting to see my abs and getting ripped and all this other stuff, but for me, at what cost? It's not worth having a kick-ass looking body if your ass feels kicked 75% of the time. So I had to find, by eating fats and so forth, that I was doing well. And you'll see in the pictures, the one picture I would go from a young man where I looked like Charles Manson on steroids, 220 pounds down to 170, and then back up to 180. So you'll see we're between the age of 39 and 40. When 6 months, I was 39 years old, just right before I turned 40, and you see the difference in 6 months. And then later, when I was 61, I went from being 230 pounds down to 170, 180, around there. I was 170 for like a week, and then I was 180. And I show a picture of when I was 17, 18 years old in the Marines, picture of me at 71, My physiques look identical, except the 61-year-old physique looked more rugged, harder. You know, not bigger, not a different configuration, just it looked more mature, harder, leaner. People looked at that picture of me at 61 say, you know, you got a rough looking face, you old fart. You're no longer young and pretty, but your body looks better than it did when you were 18. So I'll post some of those pictures on this video, and you decide. And of course, in my book, I show pictures of before and after of several of my clients, and then how they did after training with me and going on a keto diet. So again, I'm going to say all ketogenic diets are not equal, because ketogenic diet is not simply eating higher fats. You have to avoid certain kinds of fats, and believe it or not, there's no one size fits all. But some people may have to avoid certain foods that are good for, like, let's say, Dr. Dom D'Agostino has a nuts. He's sensitive to nuts, so he has to avoid nuts. He has to get X amount of fat in. He found that when he was getting dairy fat, it was making his LDLs go up. And then when he supplanted that dairy fat with another kind of fat, his LDLs went down. Whereas other people wouldn't be affected by, their LDLs wouldn't be affected. So no one size fits all. There's some tweaking that has to be done, but that's why you have to measure what's going on. So anyways, I want to thank you for spending your time and listening, and hopefully you'll like the book, and I hope you like my other books. You can find it on Amazon.com. My book, Zen and the Art of Resistance Training, and actually I'm quite pleased with them, because there's like a half century worth of research and experimentation, and also, you know, and not only just using myself as a guinea pig. I had the opportunity, as when I was a coach, to use other people as guinea pigs too. Even a couple twin studies. I use this one study, my experimentation on one set of identical triplets, which are rare, and quite a few twins, identical twins. So, can't wait to see you till next time. So have a great day. Bye bye.